Hello, and welcome to Tuesdays with Morrissey. I'm Adam Morrissey. Today I'm thrilled to be joined by Kim Scott. Kim is the author of Just Work and Radical Candor. She's also the co-founder of two organizations that aim to help companies and individuals create more equitable workplaces and rid the world of bad bosses. And prior to her work writing and consulting, Kim held several positions at Apple and Google. Welcome to the show, Kim. Great to have you.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And congrats to you also on the masterclass release.
Oh, thank you.
On navigating tough conversations. It's got to be a real honor to be on the platform.
It is. It was so fantastic working with that team, and it is a real honor to be on that platform.
Yeah, for sure. Well, congrats again.
Thank you.
I'm really excited to have a conversation about management and culture, two topics that you're a real expert in. But as we lay the foundation for that conversation, I'd be curious how you would define the current status quo in our working world, and how do you think we got here when it comes to management and culture?
When I first moved to Silicon Valley, somebody said management is neither taught nor valued in Silicon Valley. And unfortunately, I think that was very true, not only in Silicon Valley, but more broadly in the economy. And I think that is changing. That's the bad news. The good news is I think it's changing. I think people really understand that people join companies and leave bad managers, and that it's really interesting. You spend years becoming a lawyer or learning how to be an engineer, learning how to be a salesperson, but you rarely get real dedicated instruction in what it means to be a manager and how to do it well. And I think that, I went to business school, and how many classes did I take about managing people? 0. I learned exactly nothing. And I'm not knocking business school. It's great to go to business school, but I think we need to get much better at both teaching and valuing management. And I think in terms of culture, I think there's an increased awareness of how important culture is, because right now we're at an all-time low culturally.
Sure.
I think that things are so polarized and divided, and everybody's afraid to talk to everybody else, and we got to fix that.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to the status quo that you're describing around not being trained to be a manager.
Yes.
Like a lot. It's definitely every organization I've been, it seems to be something you learn on the fly. It's interesting too, though. I think about your comment about business schools and such. Management is one of those things, like, you could read all the books in the world, but you really need the experience to have that sticky factor.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I have taught radical candor to people, it's really useful to have been a manager for at least a little while. I think at some level, management, there's a lot about management that's sort of learning by doing. You can't learn it theoretically, because if you read about it and the things that happen, you think that would never happen to me, and then you're in the situation and you're like, oh, that's happening to me. And so I do think it's useful to have some experience, but we can't just teach people to be managers by throwing them in the deep end, because when they sink, they drag a whole team of people down with them. And so sort of part of my goal with both Radical Candor and Just Work is to offer some frameworks that help people think about the experiences that they're having so that they can learn faster from the experiences that they're having.
Yeah, you alluded like 2 quotes I try to balance in my own life. One by Mark Twain: he who grabs the cat by his tail can learn something he could learn no other way.
Yeah.
So really emphasis on learning by doing. And then there's I think German philosopher that said, a wise man learns from others and a fool learns only from himself.
Yeah.
We can meet in the middle there.
Yeah.
Good in shape.
Yeah, exactly. We can't. We don't have to stick our fingers in the fire to know that it's hot. And that it'll burn us.
But from hearing your story, it sounds like when it comes to experiencing some of this stuff, you had some experience with early concepts of radical candor and Just Work prior to to you defining them, what were your firsthand experiences of those concepts, and how did that help you shape these frameworks?
Yeah, early in my career, I had started a software company, and I walked into work one day, and about 10 out of the 60 people who worked at the company had emailed me the same article. And it was, and I thought, oh boy, I better read this. And the article said that people would rather have a boss who's totally competent, but kind of an asshole, than one who's really nice but incompetent. And I thought, gosh, are they sending me this because they think I'm an asshole or because they think I'm incompetent? And surely those are not my two choices. And that really sort of set me down the path of thinking about how to break free of this false dichotomy, because I think that is a false dichotomy that we have. Mm-hmm. We think that only the jerks succeed, and that is not true. There's a lot of great people who are not jerks, who are very successful. And so this sort of came to a point shortly after I joined Google. I had to give a presentation to the founders and the CEO about how the AdSense business was doing. And I marched into the room, and there was one of the founders on an elliptical trainer stepping away wearing toe shoes and a bright blue spandex unitard, not what I was wanting to see, or certainly not what I was expecting to see in the room. And there in the other corner of the room was the CEO doing his email like his brain had been plugged into his machine. So probably exactly like you in such a situation, I felt a little bit nervous. How was I supposed to get these people's attention? Luckily, the AdSense business was on fire. And when I said how many new customers we had added over the last couple of months, the CEO almost fell off his chair. Why did you say this is incredible? Do you need more marketing dollars? Do you need more engineering resources? So I'm feeling like the meeting's going all right. In fact, I now believe that I am a genius. And I walked out of the room, walked past my boss, and I'm expecting a high five, a pat on the back. And instead, she says to me, why don't you walk back to my office with me? And I thought, oh, wow, I screwed something up, and I'm sure I'm about to hear about it. And she began the conversation, but I was open to hearing from her, actually, because she had asked feedback. My boss had solicited feedback from me and had responded well. So I knew that this was a gift, but I still, I was a little reluctant to hear it. She began by telling me about the things that had gone well, not badly, but all I wanted to hear about was what I had done to mess up. And eventually she said to me, you said a lot in there. Were you aware of it? And I kind of breathed a sigh of relief, because if that was all I had done wrong, who really cared? And I kind of made a brush-off gesture with my hand. And then she said, I know this great speech coach. Would you like an introduction? And once again, I made a brush-off gesture with my hand. I said, I am busy. I don't have time for a speech coach. And then she stopped. She looked me right in the eye, and she said, I can tell when you do that thing with your hand that I'm going to have to be a lot more direct with you. When you say every third word, it makes you sound stupid. Now she's got my full attention. And some people might say it was mean of her to say I sounded stupid, but in fact, it was the kindest thing she could have done for me at that moment in my career. Because if she hadn't used exactly those words with me, and by the way, this is really important, she would not have used those words with other people on her team who were perhaps a better listener than I was. But if she hadn't used exactly those words with me, I never would have gone to visit the speech coach, and I wouldn't have learned that she was not exaggerating. I literally said every third word. And this was news to me, because I had been giving presentations my whole career. I had raised money for 2 different startups giving presentations. I thought I was pretty good at it. And it was almost like I suddenly realized I'd been marching through my whole career with a giant hunk of spinach between my teeth, and nobody had the common courtesy to tell me it was there. And so it got me to thinking, why had no one told me about this? But what was it about my boss that made it so seemingly easy for her to tell me? And as I thought about her leadership style, I realized it boiled down to 2 pretty basic things. She cared personally, and she was willing to challenge me directly because she cared personally. And so that hardly seemed so radical, caring, and challenging that I would call it radical candor. And yet, I spent a summer at McKinsey, the consulting firm. I learned one important thing in that time. All of life's hardest problems can be boiled down to a good 2x2 framework. So if you think about The vertical line is care personally. The horizontal line is challenge directly. When you do both at the same time, it's radical candor. When you challenge, but you don't show that you care, it's obnoxious aggression. When you neither care nor challenge, it's manipulative insincerity. And it's fun to tell stories about obnoxious aggression and manipulative insincerity, because that's where the drama is. But I think the vast majority of us make the vast majority of our mistakes in this last quadrant, in the upper left-hand quadrant, where you do remember to show that you care personally, but you're so worried about not hurting someone's feelings or being polite that you fail to challenge directly. And that's what I call ruinous empathy. So that's radical candor in a nutshell.
Yeah. It boils down to, you, as you said, caring personally and challenging directly. It sounds very simple, but why do you think it's so difficult for some and rare to see?
I call it radical candor because it is so rare. And I think the problem is that sort of at an evolutionary level, if we're conservative about I shouldn't say conservative, we are risk averse on a whole host of topics. But I think the topic that we're most risk averse on is sort of social risk or interpersonal risk. Because for most of our evolution, if we were kicked out of our group, we were dead. We couldn't survive on our own. And so I think we tend to optimize for the 1 time out of 10 when it's going to go badly. But what we rationally ought to optimize for is the 9 times out of 10 when you do get the feedback that from someone, either get it or give it. And it's helpful. It helps you improve and it helps them improve. So I think that sort of learning how to push through the discomfort and offer others and also solicit from others the kind of feedback that helps us grow is the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. What was it about radical candor that inspired you to write and then create an organization around Just Work?
Well, you know what? If you write a book about feedback, you're going to get a lot of it. And feedback is a gift. So some feedback that I got after I had given a radical candor talk at a tech company in San Francisco. And the CEO of that company is one of too few Black women CEOs in tech, or frankly, in any other sector. And after I finished giving the talk, she pulled me aside and she said, "I'm excited to roll out Radical Candor, Kim. I think it's going to help me build the kind of culture that I want. But I got to tell you, it's much harder for me to roll it out, Kim, than it is for you." And she went on to explain to me that as soon as she would offer anyone, even the most compassionate, gentle criticism, she would get slimed with the angry Black woman stereotype. And I knew this was true. And as soon as she said it to me, I realized that one of the things that I had failed to really account for when writing Radical Candor is the extent to which bias, prejudice, and bullying show up as, they masquerade as feedback, really. And, because as I thought about her and her experiences, first of all, it's completely ridiculous to call her an angry person. Because she's one of the most cheerful, even-keeled people I've ever met. In fact, I realized when she told me that I had failed to be an upstander for her because I failed to notice the extent to which she had to show up unfailingly cheerful and pleasant in every meeting we were ever in together, even though she had what to be ticked off about. And not only had I failed to notice the things that were happening to her as a Black woman in the workplace, I also realized that I'd been in denial about the kinds of things that were happening to me as a white woman in the workplace. And I couldn't be in solidarity with other people if I was in denial about what was really happening. So kind of hard for the author of a book called Radical Candor to admit, but there it was. And so I realized I needed to dig much deeper. And I think that part of the reason why we so often fail to respond, or we respond with silence to bias, prejudice, and bullying, is that we don't know what to say. And part of the reason that we don't know what to say is that we've conflated 3 different problems as though they're one. So we confuse bias, prejudice, and bullying. And so one of the things I try to do in this work is to separate them out. And so I want to offer you some super simple definitions, just so in the moment you'll sort of be able to differentiate. And then we can talk about how the different ways to respond, because different problems demand different responses. So bias is really not meaning it. It's unconscious, whereas prejudice is meaning it. It's a very consciously held belief, usually reflecting some unfair and inaccurate stereotype. And prejudice, there's no, and bullying, there's no, unlike bias or prejudice, there's no belief, conscious or unconscious, going on at all. It's just being mean. So for me, that was very helpful to sort of think about how to navigate these how to recognize them when they happen and then how to respond.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a real power into identifying what the behavior is and then determining right action. What I love about your work and really the workplace in general is that there's a real opportunity to make it more human.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of rich personal development learnings that anyone can experience by working in a company. But it also presents a challenge, especially as we go from like laborers to knowledge workers.
Yeah.
What role do you think companies can play to help usher personal development in its team members?
Yeah. And there's a lot of personal development in laboring as well, by the way.
Certainly. Physical
labor.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But I think that it was interesting. A friend of mine who is a professor was helping me edit both Radical Candor and Just Work. And she had an interesting observation. She said, management is in some ways about the unfinished business of education. And it is hopefully we're lifelong learners, but there are a lot of things that we failed to learn in school. We failed to learn along the way that can really benefit us both at work and at home. And in fact, a lot of the things I learned about management have helped me in my personal life. So one helps the other. It's a virtual.
Absolutely.
You get kind of a double bounce. In fact, I wrote a novel called Virtual Love about how the things that I was learning about management were helping me get out of a bad romance and into a happy marriage. So there you go. It can help you in all kinds of unexpected ways. But I think that if you're gonna be successful, you've got to teach people to collaborate. And if you're going to teach people to collaborate, you need to teach them how to talk to each other and how to care about each other. One of the more interesting experiences I had when I was working at Google, there was a guy who worked for me who was a Marine. And he came into my office one day and he said, Kim, I want to fly all my managers from all around the world. It's like 120 managers. And I want to teach them how to have get to know you conversations with each of their direct reports. And to my shame now, my initial reaction was, oh, come on. People know how to do this or they don't know how to do this. And he said, no, these are skills, these caring skills, these nurturing skills are skills that can be taught. And he said, in the Marines, we really taught people how to do this. And I was like, who knew that the Marines was a good source of touchy-feely management training? But there you go. And this training that he did, these sort of get-to-know-you conversations were part of a broader effort to have career conversations. And there was nothing anyone had ever done that moved the needle on employee engagement in the same way. So I think it's crucial that we begin to take responsibility for teaching people how to get along at work.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like there's, a couple core tenets that you got to really nail down, but there's a lot of different ways to do this. In Radical Candor, you talked about the culture differences between Apple and Google. Mm-hmm. Google historically having a very participatory leadership culture where Apple was maybe more top down.
Yeah, I think Apple certainly had a reputation for being top down, although I'm not sure it's quite fair. Google, I would say, had a let 1,000 flowers bloom, like everybody's experimenting, whereas at Apple, one thing would be chosen. And so there would be cultivating, one or two or three or four flowers instead of, but it wasn't necessarily top down. I mean, Steve Jobs famously said that at Apple, we hire people who tell us what to do, not the other way around, which was not his reputation, but there was a lot of truth to this. At Apple, there was this notion of the directly responsible individual. And the idea of the directly responsible individual was that it could be some person straight out of college, but or even high school in some cases, but a person who's responsible for a particular feature on a particular product. And that person's boss is not responsible. That person's boss's boss is not. That person is responsible. And if Steve Jobs had a problem with a particular feature, he would show up at the cubicle of the DRI. He wouldn't go through some sort of chain of command. So I think that I don't think it's the cultural differences were real, but I don't think it was like top down versus bottoms up. It was two very different ways to innovate, but telling people what to do is not going to get you great innovation anywhere, I don't believe.
Yeah. What do you think we can learn from those different cultures when it comes to applying some of these frameworks of management?
I think that there are some things that are sort of universally true, but I also think it's important to remember that they can be expressed in a lot of different ways. And so diversity of culture is really important. So for example, I think that caring personally and challenging directly, for example, are, radical candor is sort of universally human, but it is culturally relative. So it's going to sound different at Google than at Apple. Mm-hmm. And it's going to sound different in Japan than it will in Israel, for example. At one point, I had teams all over the world, and there was radical candor with the team in Tokyo. I called it polite persistence, because polite was a great way for them to think about sort of how they wanted to show that they cared personally, and persistence was an easier way for them to think of that, for that team to think about how to challenge directly. But if I had gone to Tel Aviv and said, polite persistence, they would have interpreted that as manipulative insincerity. So you've got to make sure that you remember that radical candor gets measured not at the speaker's mouth, but at the listener's ear. And so it's going to be different for each person and between each culture.
Excellent. How do you think some of these trends around, big ones being DEI, remote work, and AI will impact some of these frameworks?
So I think that, let's take those. Those are three very...
Yeah, the three big ones. Yeah, three big ones.
So I think in terms of working remotely or hybrid work, it's really important to be very conscious of what you need to do synchronously versus what you can do asynchronously. And so when it comes to giving feedback, for example, or soliciting feedback, that's something that needs to happen synchronously. If you're in person, do it in person. But if not, make sure that you're having a real conversation either on the phone or over video. And don't submit feedback in some sort of tool or send someone a text, right? Because then you don't know how it landed, and so you can't adjust. If I said radical candor gets measured not at your mouth but at the listener's ear, that requires a synchronous conversation. I think that in terms of DEI, I sort of gave a hint to it when I was talking about the Just Work framework. But very often we think we're giving someone feedback, legitimate feedback, but it's actually bias, prejudice, or bullying. And that's not helpful. That does not create a collaborative culture. And so you want to make sure that you're able to learn to recognize that in yourself and in others, and to disrupt it, because bias, prejudice, and bullying are not going to help you make better decisions. They're not going to help you innovate. They're very destructive to those goals. In terms of AI, I think it's too soon to say. I mean, I'm studying it, but I'll say that one of the things I'm experimenting with. I think that the most transformative thing about it is that it's easier to ask it questions. I think it's harder to get good answers out of it because it doesn't show its work. It doesn't say. So one of the things I'm experimenting with, I found that as a coach, very often I joke that I'm just sort of a highly paid router. So someone will describe a situation to me and I'll talk to them and then we'll hang up and then I'll go to Radical Candor Just Work and I'll grab the right pages in the book and I'll email it to them. And they're like, oh, this is so helpful. And I'm like, well, and so one of the things we're doing is we're experimenting with a version of it's sort of like a Radical Candor / Just Work bot. So you can ask it anything and then it'll grab, it won't go, out to the whole internet and grab, but it'll grab the right pages from the book and or the right paragraphs from the book and give it to you. So that has real promise. I think that, a lot of people are excited about the idea of using AI to write performance reviews, but I'm skeptical. I think that writing is thinking, and getting a chatbot to write one's performance review means your manager doesn't know what's going on. So if it could do that, then you don't need managers. You get a bot, but I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah, I'm in on the Radical Candor bot. I think that's a great application. I'll be looking and checking the Slack app store for that plugin.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll do some proactive notifications. Like, don't send that.
Oh, you know what else? You should never send any feedback over Slack, by the way.
Good.
That's a very simple bot right there. It should always be synchronous.
This looks like feedback.
Yeah, pick up the phone. Don't send it. Slack is a feedback catastrophe in general. But it's a great tool, but not for feedback. Email is also a bad, as is text. So I think that there's a wonderful tool you should check out right now, which is called Textio. And Textio will flag bias in the language that you use. And it's great. Mostly the applications have been in job descriptions and in performance review, but you can use it in any document you're writing.
I'm sure that would be helpful to bring awareness to biases you didn't even know you had. One question just on a personal level, after your successes in Silicon Valley, I'd imagine you'd had no shortages of opportunities to pursue. How'd you decide on working on raising awareness around concepts like Radical Candor and more empowering workplaces were the most important things to be focusing on and what you wanted to focus on?
My whole business career was really just one giant plot to subsidize my novel writing habit. And so I was taking a walk with Andy Grove, who was the CEO at Intel for a long time and wrote a great book called High Output Management. And he really encouraged me. He said, you should write this book on management. A lot of the drama of life happens around. If you think about a bad boss you've had, I imagine it's been one of the more dramatic experiences of your life, or a good boss. And so that was part of what made me, and I didn't understand how hard it would be. I sat down to write Radical Candor and I thought it would take me 3 months, but it took 4 years. But it was also more interesting and more fun. So I just went with it. I did it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I'm a huge fan of anything in that Bill Campbell, Andy Grove, Ben Horowitz kind of triangle.
Yeah.
That's really cool to hear. Kim, you've been really gracious with your time. Before I let you go, any reading materials or content recommendations for listeners?
Absolutely. RadicalCandor.com. You can check out our podcast. We have a blog, always putting out new content. justworktogether.com. We also have a new podcast there and a series of blog posts. So really excited to launch both of those things out in the world.
Well, we'll make sure to have links to both of those in the show notes. And thanks again for coming on the show, Kim.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Kim.
Take care. Be well.